I still remember the sound of her voice. It wasn't angry or even cold. It was just distant. The kind of tone you use when you're saying something final, not to hurt but to close a door. I had asked a simple question, one any mother would ask. So when's the wedding? And she paused. Just long enough for my heart to tighten. Then, with a faint, almost polite smile in her voice, she said, "Oh, we got married yesterday." I didn't know what to say. For a few seconds, everything around me went quiet. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked once, maybe twice. I could hear my own heartbeat. "Yesterday," I finally repeated, my voice trembling. She said, "Yeah." It was small, just a few friends. I stood there, holding the phone against my ear, staring at the sink full of dishes. The sunlight came through the small window above it, cutting through the dust floating in the air. It felt like the world had tilted, just a little, enough that nothing was standing quite straight anymore. She didn't sound sorry. She didn't sound cruel either. She sounded done. Like this conversation was just a formality. I wanted to ask where my son was. I wanted to hear his voice. But for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to say it. I just nodded, as if she could see me, and whispered, "Oh, I see." She said something like, "It was last minute. We didn't want to make a big deal." And I remember thinking, wasn't I supposed to be the big deal? Wasn't I supposed to be there? When she hung up, the silence that filled the house was unbearable. Even the birds outside had gone quiet. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. We made traditions, Sunday pancakes, movie nights, long drives to the lake in summer. He used to tell me, "You're my best friend, Mom." Somewhere, that sentence became a memory. And memories, they don't hug your back. That night after the call, I didn't cook. I just sat by the window, staring at the dark street. A streetlight flickered outside. Somewhere, a car drove past. Inside, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I tried to think of reasons. Maybe they'd eloped in excitement, maybe it wasn't planned. But every explanation led back to the same ache. He hadn't told me. I was his mother, and he hadn't told me. I thought about calling him. My hand hovered over the phone. But I couldn't. What would I say? Why didn't you invite me? Didn't you think I'd want to be there? No matter how I imagined it, my voice sounded small, needy. So I didn't call. Instead, I went to bed, but sleep never came. I kept hearing her words over and over again. "We got married yesterday." The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a hollow feeling in my chest. The kind of emptiness that makes even breathing feel like effort. I made coffee out of habit. The smell filled the kitchen, familiar and cruel at the same time. I poured a cup for him too, like I used to when he'd visit, and then realized how foolish that was. I sat down and stared at the second cup until the steam disappeared. My neighbor, Karen, knocked on the door around 9. She's been my friend for years. One of those cheerful women who somehow always know when you need company. "Morning, Linda," she said. "You look pale, everything all right?" I smiled weakly. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." She stepped inside anyway. "You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, then said quietly, "Michael got married." Her eyes widened. "Wow. Congratulations. When was the wedding?" "Yesterday," I said. And then after a pause, "I didn't know about it." Her smile faded. "Oh honey." She sat down beside me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "What happened?" I shrugged. "I wish I knew." Karen didn't push. She just sat there with me, sipping her coffee. Sometimes silence says more than words. Later that afternoon, I found myself scrolling through social media, even though I knew I shouldn't. And there it was. A photo of Michael and Anna, standing in front of a courthouse smiling. He wore a simple blue suit. She wore a white dress, knee-length, holding a small bouquet. There were hashtags. Hashtag just married, hashtag our day, hashtag finally forever. I stared at that screen for a long time. He looked happy. And that hurt the most, that he could be so happy without me. I didn't cry then either. Not yet. Instead, I pressed my hand against my chest and whispered, "I'm glad you're happy, sweetheart." Even though it broke me. That evening, I went through an old box I kept under the bed, filled with things only a mother would keep. Michael's baby shoes, a lock of hair, birthday cards, little drawings he made in kindergarten. One card said, "I love you more than pancakes." I smiled through the ache. He used to be my world. Now I was just a part of his past. As the night grew darker, I turned off the lights and sat in the quiet, listening to the sound of rain tapping against the window. There was something comforting about it, like the world was crying for me. I thought about calling him again, just to say I loved him, just to hear his voice. But the fear of being an intrusion stopped me. What if he didn't answer? What if Anna picked up again? So I whispered into the darkness instead. "Congratulations, Michael." And that was all. That was the night I realized love doesn't always have a place to go. Sometimes it just sits quietly in your chest, waiting for someone who isn't coming. The days after that phone call moved slowly, like I was walking through water. Each morning I woke up expecting to hear from him. Maybe a text, a photo, even a small apology. But my phone stayed silent. I checked it more times than I'd like to admit. Every ping of a message made my heart skip, only to find it was a reminder from the bank or a weather alert. Isn't it strange how something as simple as silence can feel so loud? I tried to keep myself busy. I cleaned the house even though it didn't need cleaning. I baked an apple pie, because that used to be his favorite. But when I pulled it from the oven and the smell filled the kitchen, I had no one to share it with. It sat there on the counter until it went cold. The next morning, I wrapped half of it in foil and gave it to Karen. She smiled kindly, but I could see the worry in her eyes. People can sense loneliness, even when you try to hide it behind small talk. That week, I kept thinking about the last time I saw Michael before the wedding. It had been almost 3 months ago. He'd stopped by on a Sunday afternoon, said he only had an hour before he needed to get back to the city. When he walked through the door, I noticed how different he looked. Older somehow. His hair was shorter, his face leaner. He smelled faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. "Hey Mom," he'd said, kissing my cheek quickly before heading straight to the fridge. It used to make me laugh, the way he'd always go for the leftovers first. But that day, something about it felt disconnected. "How's work?" I'd asked. He shrugged. "Busy as usual. Anna's been swamped too." I nodded, trying to keep the conversation light. But there was a stiffness in his answers, like he was already halfway out the door. When he left, I remember standing at the window, watching his car pull away. For the first time, I had the uneasy feeling that he wasn't coming back as often. After the wedding, that memory haunted me. All the small signs I had ignored, unanswered texts, postponed visits, quick excuses, they all started to make sense. Distance doesn't happen overnight. It creeps in quietly, like fog, until you can't see what's been slipping away. There were so many moments I wanted to rewind. The missed birthdays, the holidays spent alone because he was too busy. At the time, I told myself he'd make it up to me. But people rarely do. One evening, I decided to tidy up his old room. It still looked the same as when he'd left for college. The faded posters, the stack of books, the baseball glove on the shelf. His room smelled faintly of the past, a mix of detergent, paper, and something uniquely his. I sat on his bed and ran my hand across the blanket, remembering the nights he couldn't sleep as a boy. He'd come to my room, clutching his pillow, saying he had bad dreams. I'd let him crawl into my bed, his little head resting against my shoulder. He'd fall asleep in minutes, safe and peaceful. I used to think that kind of closeness lasted forever. But it doesn't. Children grow up, build new lives, find new homes. And somehow, without realizing it, you stop being their center. The following weekend, Karen invited me to a small get-together at her house. She said it would be good for me to be around people. I didn't feel like going, but I went anyway, partly because I didn't want to sit in that empty house again. Her living room was warm and filled with chatter. People were laughing, passing plates of cookies, talking about vacations and grandchildren. Someone asked me how my son was doing. For a moment, I froze. Then I smiled and said he's good. Just got married. "Oh, that's wonderful," someone said. "You must be thrilled." I nodded. "Yes, I am." And that was it. No one noticed the small break in my voice. I went home early that night. As I closed my front door, the laughter from that house echoed in my ears, blending with the quiet of my own. Days turned into weeks. Michael didn't call. He didn't text. I saw occasional posts, a dinner here, a weekend trip there. Each one was a reminder of the life he was living, one that didn't include me. I tried to be understanding. I told myself, he's newly married, give him space. But understanding doesn't stop the ache. One afternoon, I was pruning the small garden behind my house, something he used to help me with every spring. I found the old gloves he'd used, still tucked under the porch bench. They were worn and stiff from the last rain. I held them for a moment, tracing the dirt stains along the fingers. It felt like holding a memory that no longer belonged to me. That evening, I took out an old photo album. The cover was frayed, and the corners had begun to curl. Each page was a snapshot of a life that once felt whole. Birthdays, beach trips, Christmas mornings. There he was at 7, missing a front tooth, grinning at the camera. There he was at 16, tall and proud at his first basketball game. I touched his face on the photo and whispered, "What happened to us, Michael?" The room didn't answer, but I felt something stir in my chest, a quiet mix of love and loss. Around the 4th week he finally called. I almost didn't recognize the sound of his voice. It felt like a stranger using my son's tone. "Hey Mom," he said. I swallowed hard. "Hey sweetheart. How are you?" "I'm good. Sorry I haven't called. Things have been busy." Busy. That word again. I hated it for how small it made me feel. "It's okay," I said softly. "How's married life?" There was a pause. "It's good. Different but good." "I saw the pictures," I said before I could stop myself. "You looked handsome." He chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, it was a simple thing. We didn't want to make it a big production." I wanted to ask why. Why wasn't I there? But my voice refused to betray the question. Instead I said, "I wish you'd told me, that's all." He went quiet. Then gently, "I know, Mom. It just happened fast." I could tell he was uncomfortable, eager to change the subject. So I let him. We talked about work, about the weather. Small words carrying big spaces between them. Before hanging up he said, "I'll come visit soon." I smiled even though he couldn't see it. "I'd like that." When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank wall. I didn't believe he would come. But hope is stubborn. A week later I got a postcard in the mail. It had a picture of a lighthouse on it. On the back, in his handwriting, were 3 words. "Thinking of you." No signature, no details. Just that. I ran my thumb over the ink, half expecting it to smudge. I placed it on the fridge, next to a photo of us from years ago. The contrast between the two felt almost poetic, a reminder of distance, and of how little it takes to fill a mother's heart again. That night, I made tea and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The moon hung low, pale and steady, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Not because things were better, but because I realized I couldn't chase what didn't want to be caught. Michael was building his life, and I had to learn how to live with the echo of him, instead of his presence. Still, every once in a while, I'd catch myself doing little things for him. Buying his favorite cereal when I went grocery shopping. Setting an extra plate at the table before realizing I was alone. Habits don't fade easily when they're tied to love. Sometimes I'd pick up my phone, scroll to his contact, and just stare at his name. The temptation to call was strong. But fear is stronger. Fear of being an obligation instead of a choice. So I'd set the phone down and whisper a small prayer for him instead. Not a grand one. Just a wish for his happiness wherever he was. One evening, Karen stopped by again. She found me sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in quiet shades of gold. "You still haven't heard from him?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Not much. A postcard. A call a few weeks back." She sighed. "You raised a good man, Linda. Sometimes, good men just forget the way home for a while." Her words lingered. Forget the way home. It sounded so simple yet so true. Maybe that's all this was, a long detour in his journey. Maybe one day he'd find his way back. Or maybe not. Either way, I had to keep living. Because a mother's life doesn't end when her children grow distant. It just becomes quieter. That night, before going to bed, I looked around my home. The same walls, the same furniture, the same photos that once framed a different life. And for the first time, I whispered to myself, "It's okay, Linda. You'll be all right." The words didn't feel completely true yet. But they were the first step toward something that might be. I don't know why I kept hoping he would call. Every morning I'd check my phone before even getting out of bed, half expecting his name to light up my screen. It never did. The house had become so silent that even the refrigerator hum sounded like a conversation. I told myself I wouldn't chase after them. They needed space, and I needed to let them build their life. But silence has a way of magnifying every doubt, every insecurity, every question left hanging. It was a Sunday when it happened. The day I learned the truth I wasn't meant to hear. I had gone to the grocery store early that morning. I don't usually go out on Sundays, but the house felt suffocating. I needed to see people. To remind myself that the world still moved even when your heart stood still. As I pushed my cart down the aisle, I heard two familiar voices. I turned, and there they were. My son Ethan and his wife Claire. They hadn't seen me yet. She was holding onto his arm, laughing softly as they discussed something about dinner plans. They looked married, comfortable, like two people who belonged to each other in a way that excluded everyone else. For a moment, I stood frozen between the shelves of cereal and canned soup, unable to move. I wasn't angry, just startled. When I finally found the strength to step closer, I called out, "Ethan." He turned, surprised, almost guilty. "Mom, I didn't know you'd be here." Claire smiled politely, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Miller," she said. "Nice to see you." "Nice to see you too," I replied, trying to sound normal. "How are you both doing?" Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "We're good. Busy. Just settling into things." There was that word again, things. The invisible wall. I looked at them for a moment, then said gently, "I didn't even know where you two were staying. I would have sent something, a small gift maybe." Claire's eyes flickered to Ethan's. He hesitated, then said quietly, "We've been meaning to tell you. We moved to Ridgewood last week. A bit closer to Claire's parents." I smiled, even though something in me twisted. "That's lovely. I'm sure they're thrilled to have you nearby." "They are," she said. "They've been helping with the new place." Ethan added, "It's just temporary. We'll figure things out later." But I knew. Temporary always becomes permanent when love is involved, and when convenience sets in. I nodded, pretending not to notice the way she subtly took his hand, the way he glanced at her for reassurance before speaking. It wasn't a grand betrayal, no shouting or slammed doors, just a quiet shift, a reordering of who mattered most. Still it hurt. We exchanged a few more polite words, and then they left. I stood there in the grocery aisle, my cart half empty, my heart even emptier. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked softly as if echoing the thoughts in my mind. I walked into Ethan's old room. It looked exactly as he'd left it. Books stacked neatly on the desk, a few photos on the wall, his graduation tassel still hanging from the mirror. I sat on his bed and stared at the photo of us from years ago. His arm around me, both of us smiling wide, like the world would never change. I whispered, "You used to tell me everything." The silence that followed was unbearable. A week later, I got a call. It wasn't from Ethan. It was from my sister, Nora. "I saw something today," she began, hesitant. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you, but I think you deserve to know." My heart started pounding. "What is it, Nora?" "I saw a post on Claire's social media," she said softly. "It was a wedding photo. A real ceremony, flowers, vows, everything. It wasn't just a courthouse thing." I didn't say anything. My throat tightened. She continued. "It said, the best day of our lives, surrounded by love and laughter. Surrounded by love. Except mine." After we hung up, I sat by the window for hours. The afternoon light slowly faded into dusk. I tried to process what I'd heard, not the fact that they were married, but that they had celebrated it, shared it with others, lived a moment that I should have been part of, without me. The thing about heartbreak at my age is that it's quieter. There are no tears thrown into pillows, no angry music, just stillness, and the occasional sigh that escapes before you can stop it. I made myself some tea, though I couldn't taste it. I stared at the cup as the steam curled upward, thinking about how many times I'd imagined sitting with them at a family table, laughing, telling stories. That dream was gone now, or at least postponed indefinitely. I could have called him, demanded an explanation. But something inside me resisted. If he wanted to keep that part of his life separate, then maybe I needed to let him. Still, memories played in my mind like an old film reel. Ethan, age 5, running to me after school with muddy shoes. Ethan, age 12, staying up late to help me bake cookies. Ethan, age 17, asking if I thought he'd make a good husband someday. I had said, "Yes, but make sure she loves you for who you are, and that she lets you love your family too." How strange, the things that come back to haunt you. 2 weeks later, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. It was from Ethan. Inside was a short letter. I'm sorry for how things happened. It wasn't how we planned it. Claire wanted something small, private. We didn't want to make a fuss. I know it hurt you, and I wish I'd handled it differently. We'll come by soon to talk. Please don't be upset. I love you. I read it 3 times. Each time, it felt both comforting and painful. He said He said Claire wanted. He said don't be upset. But nowhere did he say I miss you. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the quiet room, the faint hum of the evening outside. When you raise a child, you think your love will always be enough to hold them close. You don't realize that one day, someone else's love might pull them farther than you ever imagined. That night, I dreamed of him as a boy again, standing in the doorway, holding a small paper heart he'd made in school. He said, "This is for you, Mommy. Forever." When I woke up, the sun was rising, and the house was silent again. A few days later, they did come by, just like the letter said. Ethan looked nervous. Claire was composed, her smile polite but distant. They brought flowers, the kind that look pretty but have no scent. "Mom," he began. "We wanted to see you. To talk." I nodded, offering them tea. "Of course. Sit down." The conversation was careful, measured. He apologized again, she explained again, and I listened, not because I fully believed it, but because I didn't want to lose him completely. When they left, I walked them to the door. Ethan hugged me, a little too briefly. "Love you, Mom," he said. "Love you too," I whispered. But as they walked to their car, I realized something. Sometimes love isn't about closeness. It's about distance, about learning to let go without resentment. I stood there, watching their car disappear down the road, the sound of tires fading into the evening wind. The air was cool, the sky soft with the colors of sunset. And in that quiet, I whispered to myself, maybe this is what letting go feels like. After they left that day, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a waiting room. Every corner held the echo of something unfinished. A conversation that would never happen. A laugh that would never return. For weeks, I tried to fill the silence with small things, watering the plants, reorganizing the cupboards, baking bread I barely touched. The smell would fill the kitchen for a while, warm and familiar, and then fade away just as quietly as it came. There was something about silence that became louder when you tried to run from it. I would sit by the window most evenings, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one, pretending they were tiny signals from a world still moving forward. I imagined Ethan driving home from work, maybe stopping for coffee, maybe laughing at something Claire said. And I'd whisper softly, "I hope you're happy." I meant it. But it didn't stop the ache. One afternoon, while dusting the bookshelf, I came across an old photo album, thick, worn at the edges. The one Ethan and I used to flip through every Christmas. There he was, a little boy with a toothless grin, sitting on my lap in the park. Another page, his first day of high school, me fussing over his collar while he rolled his eyes. Then his graduation, my arms around him, my eyes glistening with pride. I closed the album slowly. The weight of those moments felt almost unbearable. I had spent decades shaping a life around my child, his meals, his laughter, his future, until one day, my world became just walls and whispers. When people talk about loneliness, they often describe it as emptiness. But to me, loneliness felt crowded, full of memories, full of what-ifs, full of voices that used to exist but no longer do. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of me. For the first time, I wanted to write back. "My dear Ethan, I don't know where to begin. I don't blame you for the choices you've made, and I don't want to make you feel guilty for moving forward. But I need you to know something. Your mother's love didn't stop when you got married. It didn't pause when you drifted away. It's still here, quietly waiting for you to remember. I was there when you learned to walk, when you said your first word, when you fell and scraped your knee and cried until I kissed it better. I was there for every heartbreak, every triumph, every birthday candle. And even though you're not beside me now, I'm still here, proud, grateful, and wishing only good things for you. Tell Claire I wish her peace too. One day, I hope she sees me not as a shadow from your past, but as someone who loves you just as much as she does. With all my heart, Mom." I sealed the letter and set it on the table. But I didn't send it. Maybe some words are meant to stay within the walls that heard all your prayers. Autumn arrived quietly that year. The leaves outside my window turned amber and gold, scattering across the yard like a soft blanket. I started taking short walks in the mornings, just to feel the crisp air and the world moving. Sometimes I'd see other families, young couples with children, pushing strollers, holding hands. And instead of envy, I felt something else, a kind of bittersweet warmth. Because once, that had been me. Once I had everything they did. One morning, as I stood at the park watching the ducks float on the pond, I saw an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench, feeding crumbs to the birds. She looked up, smiled at me and said, "They always come back, you know. The ones you feed." I smiled politely, unsure if she meant the ducks or something deeper. But her words stayed with me all day. Maybe that's what love was. Not holding, not demanding, just leaving crumbs of kindness behind so that when the people you love are ready, they know where to return. A few months later, just before Christmas, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I froze. Ethan stood there, his hair a little messy, his eyes softer than I remembered. And beside him, Claire. They both looked unsure, like two children caught doing something wrong. "Mom," Ethan said quietly. "Can we come in?" I nodded, my heart thudding. "Of course." They stepped inside. The smell of cinnamon from my baking filled the air. Claire glanced around the room, her gaze landing on the framed photos, the knitted blanket on the couch, the quiet comfort of it all. "I like your home," she said softly. "Thank you," I replied. "It's simple. But it's mine." We sat down at the table. No one spoke for a while. Then Ethan reached across, his voice trembling. "Mom, I owe you an apology for everything. For not inviting you. For letting distance grow where there shouldn't have been any." I wanted to say so many things, to tell him how those months of silence had changed me, how I'd cried in the dark and then learned to stop waiting. But instead, I just placed my hand over his. "I forgive you," I said simply. Claire's eyes welled up. "I didn't mean to keep you out. I thought it would make things easier for us. I didn't realize what it would cost." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the girl who took my son away, but the woman who loved him enough to want him all to herself. I understood that now. "It's all right," I whispered. "Marriage isn't about sharing everything. Some things you build between just the two of you. I get that." The tension eased a little. Ethan smiled, a real smile this time, and for the first time in months the air felt lighter. We spent the afternoon talking, laughing quietly, remembering small things. I made tea. Claire helped in the kitchen. It wasn't perfect. It was tentative, fragile, but it was a beginning. That night, after they left, I stood by the window again. The snow had started falling, soft and silent. I thought about how love changes form over time, from holding hands to letting go, from being needed to simply being remembered. I realized something then. Sometimes love isn't about being in every chapter of someone's life. Sometimes it's enough to know your love helped write the first few pages that made them who they are. I went to bed feeling lighter. For months, I had lived inside a story of loss, but now it felt like maybe there was another chapter waiting, one not about heartbreak, but quiet acceptance. A few days later, a small package arrived in the mail. No return address, but I knew it was from Ethan. Inside was a framed photograph. The three of us from that afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table smiling. On the back he had written in his familiar handwriting, "For the woman who taught me what love looks like." I held the frame to my chest and closed my eyes. The silence that once felt so heavy now felt peaceful, filled not with absence, but with presence. The presence of understanding, of forgiveness, of something unspoken but eternal. As I placed the photo on the shelf beside the old family pictures, I realized something deeply simple. Maybe love doesn't disappear when it changes. It just grows quieter. And in that quiet, I found my peace. That night, I sat by the fire with a blanket wrapped around me. The flames flickered softly, their warmth kissing my hands. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing everything in calm. I thought of Ethan and Claire, probably curled up on their couch, maybe talking about the day, maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. I wasn't part of every moment, but I was part of their world. In the way roots belong to the tree, unseen but vital. For the first time, I didn't feel left behind. I felt complete. When I finally went to bed, I whispered a small prayer. Not for things to go back to the way they were, but for things to stay just as they were now. Peaceful, steady, real. And before sleep took me, I said quietly to the darkness. She said, "We got married yesterday. But today, I found my heart again.